The slap echoed through the laboratory louder than the hum of the machines. Abel Jones stood perfectly still, his left cheek burning red, but his dark eyes remained unnervingly calm as they locked onto Eddie Caldwell's smirking face. Instead of cowering or apologizing, like every other target before him, Abel glanced at the wall clock, 2:17 p.m., and spoke in a voice so controlled it made the room go silent. "You've got 5 seconds, Eddie," he said, his tone carrying no anger, no fear, just certainty. "Then I move." 20 lab assistants froze mid-task. Test tubes trembled on racks. Phones rose to capture what they assumed would be another humiliation. But none of them noticed Abel's subtle shift in stance. Weight centered, chin tucked, breathing measured in a 4-count rhythm. The kind of breath control that takes years to master. In a ring, under Thailand's most ruthless trainers. Eddie chuckled, pressing his palm harder against Abel's head for the crowd. "Or what? Toothpick?" What Eddie didn't know was that the AI monitoring system, the one installed 3 weeks ago for safety compliance, had been recording every insult, every shove, every act of cruelty Eddie had committed. And Abel had been counting, waiting, documenting. Within 10 seconds, the man who called him Toothpick would be on the ground, gasping, and it wouldn't just be from pain. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story of hidden discipline and institutional corruption lurking beneath Ridgefield University's cutting-edge laboratories, take a moment to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. If stories of quiet justice and strategic resilience keep you on the edge of your seat, drop a comment below about how silence can be its own form of strength. Your support helps us bring more of these powerful stories to light. And trust me, this one will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the skinny kid cleaning test tubes in the corner. Now, let's get into the story. Ridgefield University's state-of-the-art research laboratory wasn't just a place of science. It was a theater of power, where $85,000 in annual tuition bought more than just education. It bought immunity. 3 months ago, Abel Jones had arrived on a full biomedicine scholarship. His story was simple. A quiet biology student from a humble background, determined to study healing proteins and stay out of trouble. His advisor noted his exceptional focus and non-confrontational demeanor, perfect scholarship material. But every detail of that gentle persona was strategic discipline. Eddie Caldwell, 27 years old and son of Dr. Greg Caldwell, head of the research lab and darling of the biotech funding circuit, ruled the laboratory like inherited property. His crew, a rotating cast of interns and legacy admits, operated above accountability. Their mistakes got buried. Their cruelty got excused. Eddie's father made sure of it. Students whispered about the research projects that vanished, only to reappear months later, under Dr. Caldwell's name in patent filings. The same projects that Abel Jones, Jennifer Martinez, and Kai Chen had poured months into before being quietly reassigned to cleaning duties. Abel had noticed something 2 weeks ago. Dr. Caldwell wore a platinum cufflink engraved with an unusual symbol, a double helix wrapped around a dollar sign. The exact same symbol Abel had found embedded in the metadata of his stolen research files, hidden in encrypted folders beneath layers of university server directories. In morning lab sessions, Abel had taken notes with a tactical pen, carbon fiber core, DNA-coded ink, not standard student equipment. He'd positioned himself at the station nearest the emergency exits, back to the wall, with clear sight lines to every person in the room and every camera angle. His sneakers showed unusual wear at the balls of his feet, the kind developed through years of pivoting on canvas, not casual jogging. When Eddie and his crew had cornered him during the equipment inventory check, Abel hadn't flinched. His pulse had remained steady, 58 beats, the resting rate of an endurance athlete. He'd counted their footsteps without looking, mapping each person's position through sound and shadow alone. "Scholarship boy," Eddie had sneered, his breath reeking of energy drinks and entitlement. "Heard you used to wash dishes back home. Must be nice playing scientist now." Abel had ducked his head, maintaining the act, but his left hand had tapped against his thigh in a subtle rhythm. Morse code that the security consultant he'd hired would recognize from the hidden body cam feed. Evidence confirmed. Subject Caldwell. Proceed Phase 2. "Actually," Abel had said quietly, keeping his voice deliberately meek, "Caldwell Enterprises filed for patent US 2024 8887362 last month. Synthetic healing proteins via enzymatic catalysis. Funny. That's word for word from my research proposal submitted in September. Coincidence, right?" Eddie had frozen mid-smirk, his bravado cracking for just a heartbeat. This wasn't information any dishwasher should possess. "What did you just say?" Eddie's voice had turned cold, all pretense of casual mockery evaporating. "Oh, just reviewing patent law for my ethics seminar." Abel had backpedaled, clutching his lab notebook tighter. "I should get back to work." But when he'd turned to leave, Eddie had grabbed his shoulder hard. In that brief moment of contact, Abel had felt something telling. Calluses on Eddie's palm, the specific kind that came from gripping without technique. A brawler, not a trained fighter. Strength without discipline. Abel's encrypted phone had buzzed with a message from his attorney. "Documentation package complete, cloud backup secured, standing by for your signal." The stolen research wasn't just intellectual property. It represented 3 students' futures and a pattern of academic fraud that reached the university's board of trustees. Now, standing in the laboratory after Eddie's public assault, Abel watched him perform for the crowd of 20 students. Eddie's crew formed a loose perimeter, cutting off the exits while ensuring maximum visibility for their leader's dominance display. Sarah, one of Eddie's frequent enablers, live-streamed everything on TikTok with the caption, "Scholarship boy learns his place." "Listen carefully, Scholarship," Eddie said, loud enough for the room to hear. "This lab has a hierarchy, and the first rule is knowing where you belong." "Interesting you mention hierarchy," Abel replied, finally allowing steel to edge into his voice. "Do you know what the federal penalty is for academic fraud involving stolen intellectual property? Up to 5 years and $250,000, especially when it affects federally funded research grants." The words detonated like a chemical spill in the silent laboratory. Sarah's phone shook in her hand, the live stream catching her shocked expression. "Is he talking about—" "Shut your mouth," Eddie roared, his face flushing crimson. But Abel wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the encrypted interface. Within 30 seconds, the laboratory's main monitor flickered, Sarah's live stream cutting out, replaced by a split screen, Dr. Caldwell's patent application on one side, Abel's original dated research proposal on the other. Highlighted sections matched word for word. "How did you—" Eddie lunged forward, snatching at the phone, but Abel was already moving. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as surgical and impossibly fast. But to understand how a 22-year-old biomedicine student could dismantle a 27-year-old bully in under 5 seconds, and why he'd waited months for this exact moment, You need to know who Abel Jones really was before Ridgefield University, before the scholarship, before he learned that sometimes, to heal a broken system, you first have to expose the infection. And that story begins 8,000 miles away, in a Bangkok training camp where silence was considered weakness and restraint was the hardest discipline of all. 8,000 miles from Ridgefield University, in a cramped Bangkok training camp where the morning air tasted like sweat and liniment oil, a different version of Abel Jones used to exist. That Abel woke at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of his trainer's whistle, 3 sharp blasts that meant shadow drills before sunrise. That Abel wrapped his hands in frayed cotton, stepped onto canvas still damp from the previous night's rain, and moved through combinations until his lungs burned and his legs trembled. Jab, cross, hook. Teep. Switch knee. Again. 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 That Abel had earned his armband, woven red, white with sun and blue threads, signifying amateur champion status. After 37 fights across Southeast Asia, 17 knockouts, 0 losses. Then came the sparring accident. His partner, a rising prospect named Somchai, had thrown a blind elbow during a heated exchange. Abel had countered instinctively, a knee that connected harder than intended. Somchai had dropped like his strings were cut. 3 cracked ribs, collapsed lung, 4 days in intensive care. Abel had sat outside that hospital room for 72 hours, watching Somchai's mother pray in a language Abel didn't need to understand. When Somchai finally opened his eyes, Abel had already made his decision. He would use his hands to heal, not harm. The scholarship letter from Ridgefield University arrived 6 weeks later. Full ride, biomedicine track, specialization in trauma recovery, and synthetic tissue regeneration. His coaches had called him crazy. His gym brothers had called him soft. But Abel had packed his armband in the bottom of his duffel bag and boarded a plane to America with a singular mission: learn how to put people back together instead of taking them apart. What Ridgefield's administration saw when Abel Jones arrived was exactly what he wanted them to see: a quiet, grateful scholarship student who asked no questions and caused no trouble. A boy who nodded politely during orientations, kept his head down in lectures, and volunteered for the cleaning rotations nobody else wanted. What they didn't see was the routine that started every morning at 5 a.m. in his cramped dorm room. Shadow drills. 50 jabs, sharp and crisp, aimed at invisible targets, elbows slicing through air, knees driving upward with controlled violence. His breath, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, steady as a metronome. The discipline never left. He just hid it behind lab coats and textbooks. By 6:15 a.m., Abel would be in the laboratory before any other student arrived. He'd brew coffee in the small kitchenette, then spend 30 minutes reviewing his meticulous notes, not just scientific observations, but behavioral patterns. Eddie arrived at 8:20 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday, always 20 minutes late, always looking for someone to intimidate before caffeine kicked in. Dr. Caldwell checked the lab at 9 a.m. on Wednesdays, staying exactly 11 minutes before retreating to his private office. The AI security cameras had blind spots near the storage closet, but full coverage at every workstation. Abel mapped it all, documented everything. When other students stumbled in around 7:30 a.m., they'd find Abel already elbow-deep in cleaning glassware. Beakers, pipettes, graduated cylinders lined up with military precision. He'd smile when they made jokes about the janitor scholar. He'd nod when they asked him to handle the boring stuff so they could focus on real research. Nobody noticed the way he positioned himself at the sink, back to the wall, angled so he could see both entrances in his peripheral vision. Nobody questioned why he volunteered for the early cleaning shift that gave him unsupervised access to lab computers and filing systems. And absolutely, nobody recognized the faded Muay Thai armband he wore on his right bicep beneath his long-sleeve shirt. 3 woven threads in red, white, and blue, barely visible when he rolled up his sleeves to scrub stubborn residue from test tubes. The first time Eddie Caldwell shoved Abel, it happened near the centrifuge station during a busy afternoon session. A casual shoulder check that sent Abel's notebook skittering across the tile. Eddie had laughed. His friends had laughed. Abel had picked up his notebook, said nothing, and walked away. That night, Abel filed a formal complaint with the Department of Student Affairs. The response came 3 days later. After reviewing your claim, we find insufficient evidence of targeted harassment. Mr. Caldwell has denied the allegations. We encourage students to resolve interpersonal conflicts through dialogue and mutual respect. The second incident happened 2 weeks later. Eddie accidentally knocked over Abel's carefully labeled sample vials, destroying 6 hours of work. Abel filed another report, this time with photographic evidence of the shattered glass and Eddie's smirking face in the background. The response: the matter has been reviewed with Mr. Caldwell's family. Given his father's significant contributions to the university's research programs, we believe this was an unfortunate accident. Please exercise greater caution when storing valuable samples. Translation: Eddie's father writes checks. You don't. The third time, Abel didn't file a report. Instead, he went to an off-campus electronics shop and purchased a portable hard drive with military-grade encryption. He began making systematic backups of every lab log, every email exchange, every surveillance camera file he could legally access through the university's research safety portal. He documented timestamps, compiled witness lists, and cross-referenced incident reports with Dr. Caldwell's grant funding cycles. He also consulted with a civil rights attorney, pro bono, arranged through a community legal clinic who taught him the difference between he said, she said, and documented pattern of behavior with institutional complicity. The attorney had been blunt. You need video, you need witnesses, and you need him to do something so public that the administration can't bury it. So Abel waited. He studied the lab's camera system, memorizing which angles captured the best footage and which models had cloud backup enabled by default. He learned that the new AI monitoring system, installed for safety compliance, automatically uploaded recordings to a secure server that even Dr. Caldwell couldn't delete without triggering IT department audits. He mapped every camera's field of view. He knew exactly where to stand, where to position himself when Eddie came looking for his daily dose of dominance. All he needed was the right moment, the right provocation, the kind that would be impossible to explain away or excuse. On the morning of the slap, Abel had arrived at 5:47 a.m. He'd completed his shadow drills in the empty laboratory, his breath fogging slightly in the climate-controlled air. Jab, cross, elbow, knee. The movements flowed like water, muscle memory etched so deep that thinking would only slow them down. He'd cleaned the glassware methodically, positioning himself at the station with the clearest camera coverage. He'd reviewed his encrypted files one last time. 3 months of evidence ready to deploy. Then he'd rolled up his sleeves just enough that the armband showed. A small detail. A visual callback to who he really was beneath the performance of helplessness. When Eddie walked in at 8:22 a.m., already scanning the room for prey, Abel had glanced at the clock and adjusted his stance slightly. Weight centered, breath controlled, ready. Not for violence, that would be easy. He was ready for something harder, restraint measured in seconds, discipline that would speak louder than any knockout ever could. The slap came at 2:17 p.m., exactly when Abel had predicted it would. Eddie had been building toward it all day. Small provocations, testing boundaries, performing for his audience. And Abel had given him exactly 5 seconds to walk away. Because some silences aren't submission. They're countdown timers. Eddie Caldwell's disciplinary record told a story the university refused to read aloud. Freshman year at Pembroke Academy, expelled for physical altercation that sent a scholarship student to the emergency room with a broken jaw. The charges disappeared after a generous donation funded a new computer lab. Sophomore year at Westridge Prep, expelled for orchestrating a hazing incident that left 3 students hospitalized. The settlement included NDAs and a memorial scholarship in the Caldwell family name. Junior year at St. Augustine's, expelled for reasons sealed by the school's legal team. The Caldwell Foundation's $2 million endowment arrived the same week. By the time Eddie landed at Ridgefield University as a part-time lab assistant, a position created specifically for him after his 4th expulsion, he understood the fundamental mathematics of privilege. Every mistake could be erased with the right check written to the right account. What he didn't understand was why none of it made his father look at him the way Dr. Greg Caldwell looked at his research grants. The scene repeated itself every Thursday morning in Dr. Caldwell's private office. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, framed patents lining the walls like hunting trophies. Eddie would stand in the doorway, waiting to be acknowledged, sometimes for 3 minutes, sometimes for 10. The Dixon Corporation called again, Eddie offered, clutching a message slip. They want to schedule a follow-up about the protein synthesis project. I'll handle it. Dr. Caldwell didn't look up from his computer screen, fingers flying across the keyboard as he copied paragraphs from a student research proposal into a patent application template. Did you complete the inventory I assigned? Yeah, well, mostly. I had to. Mostly isn't a word we use in scientific research, Edward. Now the cold blue eyes lifted. Assessing, disappointed without surprise. You have one responsibility in this laboratory. Keep the floor orderly. Ensure the scholarship students don't touch critical data. Make yourself useful in the simplest possible way. Can you manage that? Eddie's jaw tightened. I just thought, thinking isn't what I need from you. Dr. Caldwell returned to his screen, already dismissing his son. Your mother insists you need structure and responsibility. Fine. You have structure. 20 hours per week, minimal contact with actual research, and explicit instructions to stay out of my way. If you can't handle that, I'm sure there's a community college somewhere that would accept you. The words landed like precision strikes. Eddie's hands balled into fists, but he knew better than to argue. Arguments required coherent responses his father would simply dismantle with surgical cruelty. Yes, sir, Eddie muttered. And Edward? Dr. Caldwell's voice stopped him at the door. That Jones boy, the one on the biomedical scholarship. He asks too many questions about project timelines and patent procedures. Keep him focused on cleaning duties, away from the computers, away from documentation. Am I clear? Eddie's mood lifted slightly. Finally, something he could do well. Crystal clear. As the door closed, Dr. Caldwell pulled up another file. Abel Jones's original research proposal on synthetic healing proteins via enzymatic catalysis. Brilliant work. Revolutionary, even. The kind of breakthrough that could secure a decade of funding and cement a legacy. He opened his patent application, copied another paragraph word for word, and changed the author field to his own name. Nobody would question it. Nobody ever did. The Whisper network in Ridgefield's laboratories operated on careful glances and coded language. Maya Chen, a third-year research assistant, had learned to read the signs. When Dr. Caldwell showed unusual interest in a student's independent project, that student would either be promoted to his inner circle or quietly reassigned to foundational work, cleaning glassware, restocking supplies, organizing files. The promoted ones got co-authorship on papers they barely contributed to. The reassigned ones watched their ideas appear months later under Dr. Caldwell's name. "New protocol," Maya whispered to her lab partner Daniel as they prepared samples near the storage closet. "Don't leave notebooks unattended. Don't save anything to shared drives without encryption. And definitely don't trust the anonymous feedback system." Daniel glanced around nervously. "Is this about what happened to Jennifer Martinez?" And Kai Chen before her. Both of them had promising research on cellular regeneration. Both got reassigned after Dr. Caldwell consulted on their projects. Kai filed a complaint with the ethics board. What happened? He withdrew it 3 days later. Rumor is they offered him a research position at Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. Good salary, NDA included. He took it and never spoke about the lab again. Daniel struggled for the word. "That's theft." "That's strategy," Maya corrected. "You know why Eddie's here? Not just nepotism. He's insurance. Anytime someone threatens to make noise, the story becomes disgruntled student targeting a family. The university won't touch it. Too much donor money at stake." "What about the security footage? If someone could prove lost, corrupted, accidentally deleted during system maintenance?" Maya's voice dropped even lower. "There's always a convenient technical failure exactly when you need evidence." What neither of them knew was that the AI monitoring system installed 4 weeks ago operated on entirely different architecture. Cloud backups happened automatically, stored on external servers that required federal-level clearance to access. The kind of clearance even Dr. Caldwell's lawyers couldn't obtain without triggering audits. The old system's vulnerabilities had been patched, but nobody had bothered to read the new user manual. Eddie found his crew in the break room, 4 legacy students whose presence at Ridgefield was guaranteed by family endowments and whose loyalty to Eddie was secured by proximity to power. "Demonstration day next week," Eddie announced, settling into a chair with proprietary confidence. "Big donors touring the lab. University brass everywhere. Perfect time to remind our scholarship friend where he stands in the hierarchy." Ryan, Eddie's second-in-command, grinned. "What did you have in mind? Something public, something recorded, something that makes it crystal clear who runs this place." Eddie pulled out his phone, scrolling through previous incidents. "The Dixon people want to see collaborative research culture. Let's show them what collaboration looks like when everyone knows their role." "Isn't that risky?" Sarah, the group's social media specialist, looked uncertain. "I mean, with all the cameras—" "My father controls those cameras," Eddie cut her off. "Security reports to him. It reports to him. And if something does get recorded—" He shrugged. "Technical difficulties, system glitches, the usual." What Eddie didn't know, what his father's carefully cultivated arrogance prevented either of them from checking, was that the new AI system's footage didn't route through the university's standard security office. It uploaded directly to a federal research compliance database required by new grant regulations, footage that couldn't be deleted, couldn't be edited, couldn't be explained away with convenient system failures. Eddie pulled up Abel's schedule on his phone, a habit he'd developed for maximizing humiliation timing. "Jones will be at Station 7 during the donor tour. right in the main view. Perfect stage. "You really don't like this guy," Ryan observed. Eddie's expression darkened. "My father actually noticed him, asked about his interesting questions about patent law. That scholarship kid gets more attention for scrubbing beakers than I get for showing up every day." The truth behind the cruelty emerged in that moment. Eddie didn't hate Abel Jones because he was weak. He hated him because even in a rigged system, even while performing humility, Abel had somehow earned the one thing Eddie couldn't buy: his father's attention. "So we teach him a lesson," Eddie decided. "Remind him that all the questions in the world don't change who signs the checks around here." Ryan raised his coffee cup in mock salute. "To knowing your place." The others echoed the toast, already rehearsing their roles in the coming performance. None of them noticed the small detail that would unravel everything: the red LED blinking steadily on the AI camera mounted in the break room's corner, capturing every word, uploading every confession to a server Eddie's father could never touch. The countdown had already begun. They just didn't know they were the ones running out of time. The laboratory had never looked so pristine. Every surface gleamed under the fluorescent lights, countertops wiped to reflective shine, equipment positioned with showroom precision, even the floor tiles scrubbed until they squeaked. Beakers filled with solutions in jewel tones lined the workbenches like props in a carefully staged production. Ruby red phenolphthalein, emerald green copper sulfate, sapphire blue methylene. The kind of visual symphony designed to make wealthy donors reach for their checkbooks. At Station 7, Abel Jones arranged his microscope slides with meticulous care, each one labeled in his precise handwriting. His workstation sat in the main sightline, directly visible from the entrance where the tour group would arrive at 2:15 p.m. Dr. Caldwell had personally assigned him the position that morning with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We want to showcase our scholarship program," Dr. Caldwell had said, loud enough for the other students to hear. "Show our donors how we invest in diverse talent." The unspoken message was clear: perform your role as the grateful charity case and don't speak unless spoken to. Abel had simply nodded and taken his position. Around him, the laboratory buzzed with nervous energy. Maya Chen triple-checked her titration setup at Station 3. Daniel fumbled with pH strips at Station 5, dropping 2 before getting 1 properly positioned. Even the confident students, the ones whose last names adorned campus buildings, moved with unusual care, aware that family money could secure admission but not immunity from public embarrassment. The wall clock read 2:03 p.m., 12 minutes until the donors arrived. 12 minutes until Eddie Caldwell would make his move, performing dominance for an audience that included his father, the university president, and representatives from Dixon Biotech Corporation, the company poised to license Dr. Caldwell's breakthrough research on synthetic healing proteins, research that Abel had actually developed. Abel's station held everything he needed for the demonstration: a rack of test tubes, pipettes arranged by size, a stack of lab manuals with color-coded tabs, and his leather notebook, the one that contained 3 months of documented evidence, encrypted and backed up to servers Eddie's father would never access. He checked the angles. Camera 3 had clear view of his station. Camera 7 covered the entrance. Camera 11, the AI-enhanced model installed last month, captured everything from the overhead position, including audio in a 15-foot radius. Abel adjusted his posture slightly, ensuring he stood within optimal range. At 2:08 p.m., Eddie entered through the side door with his usual crew trailing behind. He'd dressed up for the occasion, pressed khakis, a button-down shirt under his lab coat, backward cap replaced with carefully styled hair. playing the part of the responsible researcher's son. But his eyes locked onto Abel with predatory focus. Ryan whispered something that made Eddie grin. Sarah already had her phone positioned for recording. Caption pre-written, "Lab culture at Ridgefield. Everyone knows their place." The tour group's voices echoed from the hallway. Dr. Caldwell's practiced charm, the president's eager agreement, the donors' impressed murmurs. They were close. Eddie made his approach, weaving between workstations with deliberate casualness. He greeted Maya with a nod, complimented Daniel's setup, then continued toward Station 7, where Abel stood with his back to the approaching group, apparently absorbed in adjusting his microscope focus. "Looking good, Jones," Eddie announced, loud enough to draw attention. He leaned against the bench, his hip accidentally bumping the edge of Abel's workstation. The impact was calculated, subtle enough to seem unintentional, forceful enough to send a cap of reagent rolling across the surface. Abel's hand shot out, catching the small bottle before it could crash to the floor. His movements were controlled, efficient, the reflexes of someone trained to react without thinking. "Careful there," Eddie said with false concern. "Wouldn't want you to make a mess before the important guests arrive." Murmurs rippled through the laboratory. Students glanced up from their stations, sensing the building tension. Maya's eyes widened in warning. "Don't engage. Not today. Not with everyone watching." Abel set the reagent bottle back in its rack with deliberate precision. When he turned to face Eddie, something in his posture had shifted. Straighter spine, weight centered, chin tucked slightly, protecting the throat, a fighter's stance disguised as simple good posture. His breathing remained measured. 4 counts in through the nose, 4 counts out through the mouth. The kind of breath control that lowered heart rate and sharpened focus. Eddie noticed the change, but misread it as fear. "You seem tense, Scholarship. Big day for you, huh? Chance to show the donors how grateful you are for this opportunity?" "I'm grateful for many things," Abel replied softly, his dark eyes never leaving Eddie's face. "Knowledge, evidence, truth." The words hung in the air, innocuous on the surface, but weighted with meaning that made Eddie's smile falter for a heartbeat. "Truth?" Eddie leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Here's a truth. My father decides who stays and who goes in this lab. Might want to remember that before you get too comfortable." Abel's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear, not anger. Certainty. "Everything leaves a trace, Eddie." His voice remained soft, but carried with crystal clarity. "Chemical reactions, digital files, video footage, even the truth." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Especially the truth." The laboratory went still. Students frozen mid-task. The clock's mechanical tick suddenly audible in the silence. Eddie's face flushed. That wasn't the script. Scholarship students weren't supposed to speak in riddles. They weren't supposed to mention footage or files or truth with that kind of quiet confidence. "What did you just say?" Eddie's voice dropped to something dangerous. The tour group's footsteps grew louder in the hallway. Dr. Caldwell's voice. "And here we have our primary research laboratory, where our students engage in cutting-edge work on cellular regeneration." Eddie's window was closing. The performance needed to happen now, before his father entered, before the donors witnessed the careful setup. Now, while he could still claim spontaneity. His right hand rose, palm open, fingers spread, in the universal precursor to a slap. Abel didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't step back. His eyes tracked the movement with clinical precision. calculating angle and velocity. His weight shifted almost imperceptibly to his back foot. His hands remained loose at his sides, non-threatening to any observer. But to anyone trained to read combat stances, Abel Jones had just transformed from lab assistant to coiled spring. The clock on the wall ticked to 2:17:55. Ryan held up his phone, recording. Sarah's live stream notification pinged. 70 viewers already watching. The other students pressed back against their stations, giving space to whatever was about to unfold. Maya whispered, "Please don't." But the plea died in her throat as the laboratory door swung open and Dr. Caldwell entered with the tour group, 3 donors in expensive suits, the university president in her trademark pearls, a legal consultant clutching a patent portfolio. They arrived at the exact moment Eddie's open palm came forward. At the exact moment, the AI camera's red light blinked steadily overhead. At the exact moment Abel Jones stopped performing weakness and let discipline speak instead. The slap echoed through the laboratory louder than the hum of the machines, and everything, absolutely everything, changed. 0 seconds. The impact of Eddie's palm against Abel's cheek produced a sound like a thunderclap in the sterile laboratory, sharp, percussive, impossible to ignore. The force snapped Abel's head to the left. His cheek bloomed crimson in the exact shape of Eddie's hand. 5 fingers outlined in angry red against dark skin. Glassware rattled in their racks. The beaker of blue methylene solution trembled, liquid sloshing against glass. A pipette rolled off Station 6, clattering to the tile floor. Eddie's crew erupted in laughter. Ryan's bark of approval, Sarah's nervous giggle behind her recording phone. Someone in the back whispered, "Finally putting him in his place." The tour group froze in the doorway, shocked into stillness. Dr. Caldwell's rehearsed speech died mid-sentence. The university president's hand flew to her mouth. The Dixon Corporation representatives exchanged alarmed glances, already calculating PR implications. Abel didn't move, didn't cry out, didn't raise his hands to his burning cheek. He simply stood there, absorbing the pain, his body perfectly still, except for the measured rise and fall of his chest. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, 2 seconds. The laughter began to falter. Something about Abel's absolute stillness didn't match the script. Victims were supposed to react, cry, run, crumble, apologize. Something. But Abel just breathed. Eddie's grin widened, mistaking silence for submission. "That's what I thought. Now maybe you'll—" 3 seconds. Abel's eyes lifted, not with tears, not with fear. With something that made Eddie's next word catch in his throat. Clarity. Cold, crystalline clarity. Abel exhaled, slow, controlled, emptying his lungs completely. The kind of breath fighters take before contact, before movement becomes instinct. 4 seconds. His weight shifted. Subtle, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Right foot sliding back 6 inches. Left foot rooting down. Hips squaring. Center of gravity lowering. The transformation took less than a heartbeat. The skinny lab assistant disappeared. What remained was foundation, structure, discipline carved from 10,000 hours on canvas. Maya recognized it first. Her eyes widened. Oh no! 5 seconds. Eddie, emboldened by Abel's continued silence and the crowd's attention, raised his hand again. This time closed into a fist. This time aimed at Abel's temple with real malice behind it. I said, no, you're... The punch came fast. Eddie had weight behind it. Momentum. The confidence of someone who'd never faced consequence. But fast isn't the same as trained. 6 seconds. Abel's right arm rose in a sharp vertical line, elbow forward, forearm creating a shield positioned exactly where Eddie's fist would travel. The Muay Thai block, Muay Khao, designed to turn bone against bone. The collision produced a sickening crack. Eddie's knuckles met Abel's elbow at a perfect 90-degree angle. The physics were brutal. Eddie's momentum reversed against the immovable point of Abel's precisely placed counter. Eddie howled, staggering back. But Abel had already moved to the next beat. His left hand shot forward, fingers closing around Eddie's wrist before the bigger man could pull away. Not gripping, guiding, redirecting force instead of meeting it. 7 seconds. Abel's hip pivoted, smooth, circular, the movement born in Bangkok training camps where efficiency was survival. He stepped into Eddie's collapsing posture, using the bigger man's own forward momentum against him. Then came the sweep. Abel's right leg hooked behind Eddie's lead knee, shin to shin, and pulled. Not a kick, not a stomp. A controlled technical sweep that removed Eddie's foundation while Abel controlled his upper body. Physics did the rest. 8 seconds. Eddie's mass, 240 pounds of arrogance and unchecked privilege, crashed to the laboratory tile with catastrophic force. The sound was enormous, meat and bone against unforgiving ceramic. Eddie's back hit first, his head bouncing slightly on impact, arms splaying outward. The cascade began immediately. His falling body clipped the edge of Station 7. Test tubes rattled violently in their rack. The small beaker of methylene solution that had trembled earlier finally tipped, spinning like a top as it rolled across the bench. It wobbled once, twice, then tumbled off the edge, hitting the floor and rolling toward the wall, trailing blue liquid in a spreading pool. Microscope slides scattered. A lab manual slid off the bench, pages fanning open. Glass clinked against glass in a symphony of destruction. And through it all, one sound cut above the chaos. Eddie's scream. Raw, childlike. The kind of sound that comes when pain meets genuine shock, when a worldview shatters in the same moment as physical dominance. He clutched his wrist, the one Abel had redirected, now bent at an unnatural angle, his face contorted, tears already streaming down his cheeks. He broke my... Someone, help! 9 seconds. Abel stood perfectly centered, his stance relaxed again, hands at his sides. No fighter's pose, no aggression, just a young man who'd defended himself and then immediately disengaged. His breathing remained measured, his expression calm, not triumphant, not angry, simply present. He looked down at Eddie writhing on the floor and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the silent laboratory. You hit me once. I returned it with mercy. The words landed like a verdict. After 10 seconds. The laboratory existed in a pocket of suspended time. 20 students stood frozen, mouths open, phones still raised but no longer recording. Or rather, recording something completely different from what they'd expected. Ryan's triumphant grin had vanished. Sarah's phone shook in her hand, her caption suddenly horrifyingly inappropriate. The other crew members pressed back against the walls, suddenly very interested in being anywhere but near their fallen leader. The tour group remained locked in the doorway. Dr. Caldwell's face had gone pale. The university president looked between Eddie and Abel with dawning horror. The Dixon representatives were already whispering urgently to each other, no doubt calculating the cost of associating with this particular research culture. Someone, Maya, maybe Daniel, whispered loud enough to be heard, "He didn't even look angry." It was true. Abel's face showed no satisfaction, no revenge, no gloating. Just the same quiet composure he'd worn while cleaning test tubes, while taking notes, while enduring 3 months of escalating abuse. The difference was that now everyone could see what that composure had been protecting. Not weakness, strategy, not submission, discipline, not fear, restraint that required more strength than violence ever would. Eddie's sobs filled the silence, raw, gasping sounds punctuated by whimpers of pain. His crew made no move to help him. His father stood paralyzed, his carefully constructed authority crumbling as surely as his son's dominance. And above it all, mounted on the ceiling, with perfect sight lines to every angle of what had just occurred, the AI camera's red LED blinked steadily, recording, uploading, preserving truth in ones and zeros that no amount of money could erase. The clock on the wall ticked to 2:18:05. 10 seconds had passed. Everything had changed. The security team arrived in 43 seconds. 2 officers in Navy uniforms, radios crackling, hands instinctively moving toward their belts as they assessed the scene. Eddie Caldwell writhing on the floor, cradling his wrist. Abel Jones standing perfectly still, hands visible at his sides. 20 students pressed against workstations, phones raised. A tour group frozen in the doorway like a tableau of administrative nightmare. And spreading across the tile, a pool of blue methylene solution that looked disturbingly like blood in the fluorescent light. "He attacked me!" Eddie's voice cracked, tears streaming down his flushed face. "I was just talking to him, and he just went crazy. My wrist. I think he broke my wrist." The security officers moved toward Abel, hands raised in the universal gesture of, "Don't move, stay calm." But Dr. Caldwell was faster. He pushed through the tour group with the kind of authority that came from 20 years of institutional power, his face transforming from shocked to strategically outraged in the space of 3 steps. "Officers, I want that student removed immediately." His finger pointed at Abel like a weapon. "He just assaulted my son in front of witnesses. Unprovoked violence in a research facility. This is grounds for immediate expulsion and criminal charges." The university president found her voice. "Greg, let's not be hasty." "Hasty?" Dr. Caldwell's voice rose, pitched perfectly for the crowd. "President Morrison, we have a student who just physically attacked another student during an official university function, in front of corporate partners, with donors watching. There's no ambiguity here." Eddie clutched his father's leg like a child seeking protection, his earlier bravado completely shattered. "He broke my wrist, Dad. He's been threatening me for weeks, and I tried to ignore it, but—" "Threatening?" Ryan stepped forward, phone still in hand. "I've got video of—" "Exactly!" Dr. Caldwell seized the opening. "Evidence, thank you, Ryan. Officers, confiscate that phone. We'll need it for the disciplinary hearing." The security officers exchanged uncertain glances. This was escalating beyond their usual scope. Drunk students, stolen equipment, noise complaints. Not assault allegations involving the head researcher's son in front of university brass. "Sir," the senior officer began carefully, "we need to get statements from everyone before—" "Before what? Before this violent individual attacks someone else?" Dr. Caldwell was building momentum now, his charisma weaponized. "Look at him. Not even a scratch. Look at my son. Injured. Crying. The facts speak for themselves. Abel hadn't moved during the entire exchange, hadn't defended himself, hadn't spoken. He simply stood there, breathing steadily, watching Dr. Caldwell perform the same institutional protection that had swept Eddie's violence under expensive rugs for years. Then, finally, Abel raised his right hand, slowly, deliberately, making sure the security officers could see it wasn't a threat, and pointed at the wall. At camera 11. The AI-enhanced model with the blinking red LED. It recorded everything, Abel said quietly. The laboratory went silent. Dr. Caldwell's eyes followed Abel's gesture to the camera, and for the first time, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. The new system, Abel continued in that same steady voice, AI monitoring with cloud backup, installed 4 weeks ago for federal research compliance. Audio and video automatically uploaded to external servers. He paused. You can't delete it, Dr. Caldwell. Not even you. This is absurd, Dr. Caldwell sputtered, but his earlier confidence had cracked. The boy is clearly trying to— Let's watch it, the university president interrupted, her voice sharp. She'd been on the job for 6 months, brought in specifically to clean up the kind of problems that threatened accreditation. This had that smell. If there's footage, we review it, now, before this goes any further. The senior security officer moved to the nearest workstation, pulling up the lab's monitoring system. His fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating to the cloud interface. Camera 11, timestamp 14/1700 to 14/1830. Yes, Abel confirmed. The officer pulled the file, 30 seconds of loading, then the laboratory's main monitor flickered to life with crystal-clear footage. Everyone crowded closer. The Dixon representatives, the president, Dr. Caldwell, his jaw tight, Eddie still on the floor but craning to see, students pressing in from all sides. The playback began. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds of footage. What looked like unprovoked attack in real time revealed itself on playback as textbook self-defense. Controlled. Proportional. Surgical. The playback ended with Abel standing over Eddie, saying clearly, "You hit me once. I returned it with mercy." The laboratory remained silent for 5 full seconds. Then the murmurs began, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. He didn't start it. Eddie threw a punch first. That wasn't an attack. That was self-defense. Dr. Caldwell's face had gone from pale to ashen. That footage is incomplete. It doesn't show the context. The weeks of context? Abel's voice cut through, still quiet, but now carrying an edge of steel. He reached into his lab coat pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, placed it on the nearest workstation with a soft click that might as well have been a gunshot. "This contains 3 months of documentation," Abel said, looking directly at the university president. "Eddie's harassment, my formal complaints that were dismissed, time-stamped photographs of damage to my work, security logs showing his pattern of targeting scholarship students." He paused, then pulled out a second USB drive. This one he placed deliberately in front of Dr. Caldwell. This one contains something else: email trails, file metadata, comparative analysis showing how my original research proposal, submitted September 12th, matches word for word with Dr. Caldwell's patent application filed November 3rd, synthetic healing proteins via enzymatic catalysis. My work. His name. The Dixon representatives leaned forward. Patent theft was exactly their concern. Abel continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent laboratory. Correspondence with my attorney. Consultation with the university's ethics board, filed anonymously because I knew what happened to students who spoke up. Encrypted backups stored with a third-party legal firm set to release automatically if anything happened to me or my academic standing. Dr. Caldwell's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. "I didn't come here to fight," Abel said, and now emotion finally entered his voice. Not anger, but something deeper. Grief, maybe. Disappointment. "I came to heal, to learn, to contribute something meaningful to medical science. But to heal a wound, you have to expose the infection first." He looked at Eddie, still on the floor, then at Dr. Caldwell. "You taught me that, actually, in your lecture on surgical debridement. Week 3. You cannot treat what you refuse to see." The university president picked up both USB drives with trembling hands. "We'll need to review these immediately in my office. Dr. Caldwell, you're required to attend. Officers, I want formal statements from every witness. No one leaves until—" "This is ridiculous!" Dr. Caldwell's composure finally cracked, his voice rising to something desperate. "You're going to take the word of a scholarship student over mine? Over 20 years of service to this institution? Over documented evidence?" The president's voice was ice. "Yes, Greg, that's exactly what I'm going to do." Eddie reached up, grabbing his father's sleeve like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. Dad, fix this. You said you'd fix anything. You always fix it." But Dr. Caldwell couldn't fix this. For the first time in his son's life, there wasn't enough money, wasn't enough influence, wasn't enough institutional protection to make the truth disappear. The AI camera's red light continued blinking, steady as a heartbeat, recording the moment that silence finally broke its chains. The video hit social media at 6:47 p.m., uploaded by someone in the tour group whose NDA hadn't included smartphone footage. By 7:30 p.m., it had 15,000 views. By midnight, 3 million. The title varied across platforms, but the message was universal. Bully hits skinny student in lab, instantly regrets it. Rich kid learns consequences exist. When the quiet one fights back. But the clips that went truly viral weren't the sweep or the fall. They were the moments before and after. Abel standing perfectly still after the slap. His cheek burning red, his eyes eerily calm. Eddie's childlike scream as reality replaced entitlement. And Abel's voice, steady as steel. "You hit me once. I returned it with mercy." By morning, the story had escaped the algorithm and landed in the real world. Day 2, Tuesday, the Chronicle of Higher Education ran the headline, "Viral Lab Incident Exposes Questions of Privilege and Accountability at Elite Universities." Inside Higher Ed followed with, "When Institutional Protection Meets Undeniable Evidence." The Ridgefield case. But it was the opinion piece in the Washington Post that made phones ring in administrative offices across campus. The Skinny Student and the Culture of Academic Impunity. Why one slap revealed decades of systemic failure. The writer, a civil rights attorney, dissected not just the assault, but the 3 months of documented harassment that preceded it. The complaints dismissed. The power structures that enabled escalation. The scholarship student forced to become his own investigator, his own protector, his own advocate. The piece ended with a question that legal departments across the country were already asking. How many other Abel Joneses are out there right now, documenting abuse because institutions refuse to see it. By noon, Dixon Biotech Corporation released a statement. In light of recent events, we are pausing all partnership discussions with Ridgefield University, pending the outcome of internal investigations. The pause was corporate speak for "we're out." 3 other pharmaceutical partners issued similar statements by end of business. Collectively, they represented $14 million in annual research funding. Dr. Greg Caldwell's office phone rang 47 times that afternoon. He answered none of them. Day 3, Wednesday. The university's Board of Trustees convened an emergency session at 8 a.m. President Morrison presented both USB drives, the security footage, and a preliminary legal analysis that used words like liability, negligence, and federal investigation. By 10 a.m. Dr. Caldwell had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a formal inquiry. By noon, the inquiry had expanded to include 6 other students who'd come forward with complaints dating back 3 years, complaints that had been resolved internally through settlements, reassignments, and NDAs that lawyers were now arguing might not be enforceable given the pattern of institutional knowledge. Maya Chen was the first. She arrived at President Morrison's office with a folder containing emails from Dr. Caldwell's account, showing how her research on cellular regeneration had been incorporated into his grant proposals without attribution. She'd been too afraid to speak up before, too aware of how power worked. "I kept copies," she said quietly, sliding the folder across the desk, "just in case I ever found the courage." By 2 p.m., Daniel Torres had come forward with his own USB drive, correspondence showing how he'd been pressured to falsify data in a study that Dr. Caldwell later published as sole author. The pressure had been subtle, professional, terrifying. "He told me I'd never work in research again if I made trouble," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "I believed him. Everyone believed him." The testimonies kept coming. Not all about Dr. Caldwell directly, some about Eddie, some about the culture of fear that had calcified over years of unchecked authority. Students who'd been shoved, mocked, gaslit into thinking their experiences didn't matter because they couldn't prove them. Now they had proof. Abel's courage had given them permission to speak. Day 4, Thursday. Abel declined every interview request. CNN, The New York Times, Good Morning America, local news stations camping outside his dorm, a podcast hosted by a former prosecutor who wanted to discuss institutional accountability in the age of smartphones. His attorney released a statement on his behalf. Mr. Jones appreciates the public support, but wishes to maintain his privacy during this process. He has cooperated fully with university investigators and law enforcement. His focus remains on his academic work and contributing to the scientific community. He hopes this incident leads to meaningful institutional change, not just viral attention. When a reporter cornered him outside the library, Abel stopped long enough to say only one sentence. "Courage isn't the goal. Accountability is." Then he walked away, leaving the reporter with a quote that would be repeated in think pieces for weeks. Day 5, Friday. Eddie Caldwell hadn't left his apartment in 3 days. He sat in the dark, laptop open, watching the video on loop. The slap, the punch, the fall, his own scream echoing through tinny speakers. Comments scrolled endlessly below. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Imagine thinking daddy's money makes you untouchable. That wasn't even a fight. That was a lesson. His phone had died on day 2. He hadn't charged it, didn't want to see the texts from former friends, the messages from his father's lawyer, the suspended notification from the university. Ryan had posted a video apology, claiming he didn't know the full context. Sarah had deleted all her social media accounts. The rest of the crew had scattered like roaches when the lights came on. For the first time in Eddie's life, his father's power couldn't protect him. Couldn't buy silence. Couldn't make the truth disappear into convenient technical failures. Because the truth wasn't on a university server anymore. It was everywhere. Eddie replayed the moment his fist had connected with Abel's elbow. The sickening crack he'd felt in his own bones. The sweep that had turned his world sideways. But worse was what came after. Abel's face. Not triumphant, not even angry. Just disappointed. Like Eddie had confirmed exactly what Abel had expected all along. Day 6, Saturday. The university released its interim findings at 4 p.m. Following a comprehensive review, Ridgefield University has identified significant failures in our reporting and accountability systems. Edward Caldwell's enrollment has been terminated effective immediately. Dr. Gregory Caldwell remains on administrative leave pending criminal and civil investigations into allegations of research misconduct and intellectual property theft. We have also identified systemic issues in how complaints from scholarship and minority students have been handled. Effective immediately, all such complaints will be reviewed by an independent external board. And we are implementing mandatory training for all faculty and staff on recognizing and addressing power-based harassment. We owe Abel Jones an apology. His courage in documenting abuse and his restraint in defending himself embody the integrity we claim to value but have failed to protect. He should not have had to be his own advocate. We failed him, and we are committed to ensuring this never happens again. The statement was careful, lawyered, but it was also an admission that institutions rarely make. We were wrong, and we knew we were wrong, and we did nothing. On Sunday, day number 7, Abel returned to the laboratory at 6 a.m., his usual time. The space felt different now, lighter, somehow. The oppressive weight of performed helplessness had lifted. He prepared his workstation with the same meticulous care, slides labeled, microscope calibrated, notebook opened to a fresh page. The beakers of colored solutions had been replaced, the methylene stain cleaned from the tile. Maya arrived at 6:30, carrying 2 coffees. She set one beside Abel's microscope without a word, then took her usual position at Station 3. Daniel came at 6:45, nodding silently as he passed. By 7 a.m., 6 students had arrived early. More than had ever voluntarily shown up before required hours. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that comes not from fear, but from shared purpose. At 7:15, Abel's phone buzzed with an email from the Dean of Research. Mr. Jones, we would like to discuss restoring you as primary author on the Synthetic Healing Proteins project, with full access to resources and a research assistant of your choosing. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. Abel read it twice, then set his phone aside and returned to his slides. The work was what mattered. The work had always been what mattered. Everything else was just noise. But it was noise that had finally, undeniably, forced the truth into light. 6 weeks later. The laboratory looked the same fluorescent lights, same gleaming equipment, same beakers of jewel-toned solutions arranged on workbenches, but the air felt different, lighter, like a held breath finally released. Above the entrance, where motivational posters about excellence through innovation used to hang, a new plaque had been mounted. Brushed steel, simple engraving. Where silence broke its chains, Ridgefield Laboratory for Ethical Research, beneath it, in smaller text, dedicated to those who speak truth to power, and to institutions that finally listen. Students paused to read it on their way in. Some touched it briefly, reverently, like a memorial. In a way, it was a marker for the old culture that had died here, and the new one being born in its place. Abel arrived at 6 a.m., as always, but his destination had changed. Station 7, the site of the confrontation, had been converted into a storage area. Too many people had requested transfers away from it, unable to work in a space that carried such charged memory. Instead, Abel now occupied the corner office that had once been Dr. Caldwell's private domain. The mahogany desk was gone, replaced with a simple workbench. The framed patents, those predatory trophies, had been removed. In their place, a whiteboard covered in Abel's neat handwriting, molecular diagrams tracking the progress of his synthetic healing protein research. His research, his name, his vision. The nameplate outside read, Abel Jones, Lead Researcher, Biomedical Regeneration Project. Underneath, a smaller line, funded by the Morrison Ethics in Science grant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The university president, who'd almost presided over the burial of Abel's complaint, had instead created a $500,000 endowment in his honor. Part apology, part insurance against future failures. Abel set down his coffee and pulled up his latest data. The protein synthesis yields were promising. If the next round of trials held, they might be looking at a breakthrough in wound healing that could help burn victims, surgical patients, trauma survivors. Healing, not harming. The mission he'd set 8,000 miles ago in a Bangkok hospital room, watching Somchai's mother pray. A knock on the doorframe interrupted his thoughts. Ryan stood there, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The same Ryan who'd live-streamed Abel's humiliation with a mocking caption, who'd laughed the loudest, who'd posted that weaselly apology video when the tide turned. Ryan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. I owe you an apology. A real one, not the PR bullshit I posted online. Abel turned in his chair, waiting. I was complicit, Ryan continued, the words clearly rehearsed, but genuine. I knew what Eddie was doing was wrong. I knew you'd filed complaints. I knew about other students who'd been targeted, and I said nothing because it was easier. Because being on Eddie's side meant being protected. He looked at the floor. That video I took? I thought I was recording someone getting put in their place. Instead, I recorded myself being a coward. I'm sorry. Truly. Abel studied him for a long moment. Ryan was a follower, not a leader. Weak, not evil. The kind of person who became dangerous only when given permission by someone more powerful. Apology accepted, Abel said finally. What you do next matters more than what you did before. Ryan nodded, blinking rapidly. Thank you. I changed my major, social work. Figured if I'm going to follow someone's lead, might as well be someone trying to help people instead of hurt them. After Ryan left, Abel allowed himself a small smile. Redemption was possible, not guaranteed, but possible. That was more grace than he'd been offered when he'd needed it. At 9 a.m., the laboratory filled with the usual rhythm of research, pipettes clicking, centrifuges humming, quiet discussions about data sets and control variables. Sarah Chen, no relation to Maya, though they'd become close friends through shared trauma, approached Abel's office hesitantly. She'd been one of Eddie's crew, though more peripheral than Ryan. She'd deleted her social media, but hadn't fled the university. Dr. Jones, Mr. Jones? Abel is fine, he said, not looking up from his notes. Abel, I was wondering. She shifted her weight, uncomfortable. In the video, after Eddie hit you, you did this breathing thing. 4 counts, super controlled. Everyone's been talking about how calm you stayed, and She exhaled in frustration. I'm in therapy now, dealing with anxiety, and my therapist mentioned breathwork, but I wondered if you could show me what you do. The real version? Abel set down his pen. This was the 3rd request this week. Students who'd witnessed the confrontation had noticed what the viral clips missed. The discipline beneath the defense. The preparation that looked like stillness. It's called tactical breathing, Abel explained, gesturing for her to sit. 4 counts in through your nose, hold for 4, out through your mouth for 4, hold for 4. Repeat. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system, lowers your heart rate, gives your prefrontal cortex time to catch up with your amygdala. He demonstrated, his chest rising and falling with metronomic precision. Sarah tried to mirror him. Her breath hitched on the 2nd count, rushed on the exhale. Don't force it, Abel said gently. Think of it like pouring water, steady even. You're not trying to control the breath. You're partnering with it. They practiced for 5 minutes. By the end, Sarah's shoulders had dropped 2 inches, her jaw unclenched. It actually works, she said, surprised. It works when you need it most, Abel replied, which is why you practice when you don't. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you could have destroyed Eddie in that lab. Everyone who knows anything about fighting says you pulled every technique, that you could have put him in the hospital if you'd wanted. That's the point, Abel said quietly. Knowing you could and choosing not to is the whole discipline. The news arrived during lunch. Eddie Caldwell had officially withdrawn from all higher education, his transcripts flagged with a conduct notation that would follow him to any institution he tried to attend. His attorney had negotiated a settlement, a public apology, mandatory counseling, and a 5-year prohibition from enrollment in any university receiving federal research funding. Dr. Greg Caldwell faced harsher consequences: federal charges for grant fraud, civil suits from 3 former students, academic misconduct findings that would be published in every major research journal, his patents under review, his reputation destroyed, his career effectively over. The university's legal team had been clear. This wasn't vengeance. This was accountability. The difference mattered. Maya raised her coffee cup in a quiet toast when the news broke. To truth-winning, for once. Daniel added, to not having to wait for someone else to save us. Abel didn't toast, didn't celebrate, just returned to his protein synthesis data because the work was what mattered. The work would outlive the drama. The work would help people long after the viral videos faded into algorithm obscurity. At 4 p.m., President Morrison visited the laboratory unannounced. She stood at the entrance, reading the plaque, her expression unreadable. Then she found Abel in his office. I wanted to tell you in person, she said. The board approved the cultural review recommendations, independent oversight for all complaints, mandatory reporting for power-based harassment, anonymous tip lines managed by external investigators. It's not perfect, but it's a start. It's more than a start, Abel replied. It's what should have existed all along. Morrison nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. I also wanted to ask, we're creating a student advisory council for research ethics. Would you be willing to serve? Abel considered. More committees, more meetings, more time away from the bench, but also more voices, more protection, more chance that the next Abel Jones wouldn't have to fight alone. Yes, he said, on one condition. The council has actual power, not just advisory capacity. Binding recommendations, real oversight. Agreed, Morrison said without hesitation. After she left, Abel returned to his whiteboard. He added a new line of equations, then stepped back to assess the overall structure. Beneath the molecular diagrams, he wrote in small letters, "We build so loudly with integrity that there's no room left for fear." It wasn't a quote from a textbook or a famous scientist. It was simply the principle he'd been living by since the day he'd decided to document instead of retaliate, to strategize instead of surrender. And now, slowly, it was becoming the laboratory's principle too. As evening light filtered through the windows, students began packing up their workstations, but several lingered, gravitating toward Abel's office, not for help with protocols or data analysis, but for something less tangible. Reassurance, maybe. Permission to believe that institutions could change. Evidence that speaking up wouldn't always result in being crushed. Abel gave them what he could. His time, his attention, his willingness to listen to their own stories of small injustices and accumulated fear. Because healing wasn't just about proteins and cellular regeneration. Sometimes it was about transforming a place where violence had been tolerated into a place where dignity was protected. The laboratory had earned its new name, the Hall of Justice, where silence had broken its chains and a new culture was being built. One honest conversation, one act of integrity, one refusal to accept that's how it's always been at a time. 10:47 p.m. The laboratory existed in that liminal space between day and night. Fluorescent lights dimmed to emergency levels, equipment powered down to standby hums, the kind of stillness that made footsteps sound like intrusions. Abel was alone. He'd sent the last lingering student home at 9, a freshman named Marcus, who'd been too anxious about contaminating his samples to leave. Abel had reviewed his technique, assured him the protocol was sound, and gently insisted that rest was part of the scientific process too. Now, standing at his workbench in the corner office that still felt borrowed despite his name on the door, Abel pulled something from his backpack that he hadn't touched in 6 weeks. The armband, red, white, and blue threads woven tight, frayed at the edges from years of sweat and canvas friction. The fabric had faded, but the meaning remained. Southeast Asian amateur Muay Thai champion. 37 fights, 17 knockouts, 0 losses. A life he'd walked away from. A version of himself he'd thought he'd left behind. Abel set the armband on the bench beside his microscope, warrior artifact next to scientific instrument, and studied the juxtaposition. In the reflection of the glass-fronted equipment cabinet, he could see both objects and his own face hovering between them. Fighter and scientist. Violence and healing. The boy who'd put Som Chai in the hospital, and the man who'd spent years learning to put people back together. For so long, he'd believed those identities were contradictory. That choosing medicine meant abandoning combat. That the discipline of the ring had no place in the discipline of research. But the last 6 weeks had taught him something different. The same breath control that steadied him through shadow drills had kept him calm when Eddie's palm connected with his cheek. The same tactical awareness that mapped opponents in the ring had helped him map cameras and angles in the lab. The same restraint that separated champions from brawlers had turned what could have been assault into undeniable self-defense. He hadn't left the fighter behind. He'd transformed it into something more precise, more purposeful. Abel picked up the armband, feeling its weight, barely 2 ounces, but carrying the gravity of identity. He tied it around his right bicep, adjusting it until the colors sat straight, then rolled down his sleeve to cover it. Hidden, but present, like discipline itself. His laptop chimed. an email notification at nearly 11 at night. Probably spam. Or another interview request he'd decline, but the sender line made him pause. Global Health Innovation Foundation, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Director. Abel opened it. Dear Mr. Jones, I hope this message finds you well, though I recognize well may be complicated given recent events. I'm writing on behalf of the Global Health Innovation Foundation, a consortium of medical research institutions across 17 countries. Our mission is to identify and support groundbreaking work in regenerative medicine, with particular focus on researchers who demonstrate both scientific excellence and ethical integrity. Your work on synthetic healing proteins via enzymatic catalysis came to our attention through academic channels several months ago. Your preliminary findings on accelerated tissue regeneration are remarkable. But what prompted me to write tonight isn't just your research. Like millions of others, I saw the video. More importantly, I read your original research proposal, the one Dr. Caldwell attempted to claim. I reviewed your documentation methods, your systematic approach to accountability, and your restraint in a moment when violence would have been understandable but counterproductive. The Foundation is prepared to offer you a multi-year grant, $750,000 annually for 5 years, renewable, to continue your healing protein research under your own direction. This includes laboratory resources, a research team of your choosing, and mentorship from leading figures in regenerative medicine. But beyond funding, we're offering something else: a platform. The chance to present your work at the International Symposium on Medical Ethics in Geneva this spring. To speak not just about your research, but about what it means to pursue science with integrity when systems fail to protect that integrity. Your work matters, Abel, and your restraint, your choice to document rather than destroy, to strategize rather than surrender, matters just as much. The world needs more scientists like you, scientists who understand that true strength isn't about dominance, but about discipline, about knowing what you're capable of and choosing, deliberately, when and how to use that capability. Please consider this offer. We believe you have the potential to change not just medical science, but the culture surrounding how science is conducted. Respectfully, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, Director, Global Health Innovation Foundation. Abel read the email 3 times. $750,000 annually. His own team. Geneva. A platform to ensure what happened to him and to Maya, Daniel, Kai, Jennifer, and countless others wouldn't be buried in the future. The logical part of his brain, the scientist, immediately began calculating. 5 years of funding meant viable clinical trials. Mentorship from leaders in the field meant accelerated learning. A platform meant amplified impact. But another part of him, the fighter who'd learned that victories came with consequences, hesitated. Going public meant more exposure, more viral attention, more people treating him like a symbol instead of a student, more expectation that he'd be spokesperson for every injustice, he'd be representative of every underrepresented student, champion of every cause. He'd just wanted to do his research in peace. But peace, he'd learned, wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of justice. And justice required voices willing to speak, even when silence would be easier. Abel stood, walked to the window overlooking the darkened campus. Ridgefield at night looked peaceful, paths lit by antique lampposts, buildings outlined against the star-scattered sky, the illusion of order and safety. But he knew what happened in spaces like these when no one was watching, when institutions valued reputation over truth, when money silenced complaints and power erased evidence. "I fight differently now," Abel said aloud to his reflection in the glass. "Not with fists, not with force. With documentation, with patience, with the kind of strategic discipline that knew when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when to let evidence speak louder than words ever could." He returned to his laptop and began typing. "Dr. Tanaka, thank you for this extraordinary offer. I accept, with gratitude and full awareness of the responsibility that comes with this opportunity. I have one request. That part of the platform includes amplifying other voices. Students who've experienced similar institutional failures. Researchers whose work has been stolen. Anyone who's had to become their own advocate because systems designed to protect them chose not to. My story went viral because it was captured on camera. But there are thousands of stories that happened in the shadows, where no camera was watching. Those voices matter just as much as mine. If we're going to change the culture of science, we need to change it for everyone, not just those lucky enough to have proof. I look forward to working with you. Respectfully, Abel Jones." He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then closed the laptop and returned to the window. 5:43 a.m. Dawn broke slowly over Ridgefield, the kind of gradual illumination that transformed darkness into gray, then gray into gold. Abel had stayed in the laboratory all night, not working, just thinking, planning, preparing for the next chapter of a story that had started 8,000 miles away in a Bangkok training camp and had somehow led here. The campus began waking up, early joggers on the paths, maintenance crews starting their rounds, the first ambitious students heading to libraries and labs chasing their own versions of excellence. Abel looked at his workbench, the armband and microscope still side by side, no longer contradictory, but complementary. Two tools for two kinds of precision. Two expressions of the same fundamental discipline. He thought about Eddie, probably still holed up somewhere, replaying the worst moment of his life on loop. About Dr. Caldwell, watching his legacy crumble under the weight of his own greed. About Maya and Daniel and every student who'd found courage in watching someone else refuse to stay silent. He thought about Somchai, half a world away, hopefully recovered, and back in the ring. About the hospital room where Abel had made a promise to use his hands for healing instead of harm. He'd kept that promise, just not in the way he'd imagined, because healing sometimes meant exposing infection. Justice sometimes required confrontation. And strength, real strength, wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about choosing when and how to engage with precision, purpose, and restraint. Abel picked up the armband one more time, feeling its weight, then carefully placed it in his desk drawer beside his research notebooks. Not hidden, not abandoned. Simply integrated into who he'd become, fighter and scientist, champion and healer, the quiet boy who'd documented abuse in silence and the man who'd let discipline speak louder than violence ever could. The laboratory door opened. Maya arrived first, carrying 2 coffees, as had become their routine. She nodded at Abel through the glass wall of his office, and he nodded back. No words needed, just mutual recognition between survivors who'd found their voices. Daniel arrived moments later, then Marcus, the anxious freshman, then others, until the laboratory filled with the morning rhythm of purpose-driven work. Abel returned to his bench, pulled up his latest protein synthesis data, and began mapping the next phase of research. The work that would help burn victims heal faster. Surgical patients recover cleaner. Trauma survivors rebuild what violence had torn down. The irony wasn't lost on him. The boy who'd once caused trauma with precision was now healing it with the same discipline. Outside, sunlight flooded the campus. Inside, the Hall of Justice lived up to its name, not because it had always been just, but because it had chosen, finally, to become what it should have been all along. A place where silence broke its chains, where truth spoke louder than money, where a single act of courage had sparked a cultural transformation that would outlast any viral video. Abel glanced once more at the plaque by the entrance, visible from his office. The words that would greet every student, every researcher, every person who entered this space, where silence broke its chains. And beneath it, in smaller letters that he'd suggested they add, "True strength doesn't roar. It reveals itself when silence is mistaken for weakness." The moral wasn't just for him. It was for every person who'd ever been underestimated. Every quiet voice that chose strategy over surrender. Every act of discipline that looked like weakness until the moment it transformed into undeniable power. Abel turned back to his microscope, adjusted the focus, and continued his work. The fight was over. The healing had just begun. And this time he was building something that couldn't be stolen, buried, or erased. A legacy not of violence, but of the discipline to choose when violence wasn't necessary at all.